As an example, we often have in the security operations center a single officer looking at 30 different cameras, and those rotate every 30 seconds for a total of 240 cameras. There's absolutely not a human, but maybe one or two on this planet that actually look at all of those cameras and figure out what's going on at some of your critical points. Critical infrastructure depends really where you are in the world and even in where you are in the country. Because what critical infrastructure is in, let's say, Saudi Arabia is not the same as the United States. A desalination plant in Saudi Arabia is very important, not as important here. But I think that whenever you look at critical infrastructure, does it do three things? Is it important or vital to the functioning of your society, its government, its economy, and allows your freedom of movement to affect both? So that's going to vary, but I think that demonstrates what critical infrastructure is and probably isn't. The main threats against critical infrastructure vary. They vary depending on where you are, obviously, but even in the United States, for example, the threats have become very much from all directions, and in their prevalence. There's a difference, really unanticipated, I think, in this industry and writ large, the amount of threats that are coming at our critical infrastructure. They can exist, as we all know, in acts of terrorism and activists and things like that. They could be cyber attacks. But the thing that's also been affecting our critical infrastructure is just weather conditions, which have increased in the last 4 years, almost threefold. So, and the last one that's often overlooked is just sabotage or internal kind of angst and frustrations with companies.
Yeah, so when we think about the evolving threat landscape in critical infrastructure, since 2022, we've actually seen a 70% increase in attacks in the energy vertical specifically to that.
So even weather is having a huge impact on our critical infrastructure, which is interesting. From about 1980 to about 2019, we averaged about 8 events per year. But since 2019 to 2023, we see about 20.5 incidents per year, which has cost in each instance almost about $1 billion.
Yeah, so cyber threats have become a more prevalent attack on critical infrastructures, right? So the bad actor is getting more sophisticated based on risk versus reward, right? So the ransomware that they're holding big organizations hostage to be able to release their data in order to function properly. And those can be done remotely, right? So no longer does the threat have to be actually on the premises. It can be done remotely or even out of country.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating is that, 67% of the oil and gas and utility companies have experienced some sort of ransomware. And 98% of those, they have affected or somehow compromised their backup systems, which is really their primary goal. The biggest challenge is securing critical infrastructure is the various nature of critical infrastructure, its location, and the varied threats and potency of those threats that come at you. What you find is there's no single solution to address any one of these threats, even after you've determined that it's a threat. So our best practices I think you have to start philosophically on what your approach. Do you want to man equipment, which provides a standoff, or do you want to equip the man, which provides decision makers much earlier on in the effort? Which I think is, once you answer that philosophical question, then you can start to build your hybrid solution to address that. And Jordan, I mean, when you talk about just the critical infrastructure and the technologies that are available.
Yeah, I mean, you start to look at a hybrid approach, which is the best of humanity and the best of technology, right? But you have to look at it as a layered approach, right? So taking the perimeter in, outside of a cyber threat, everything starts and stops at the perimeter. So if we can detect that early before the event starts happening or stop it from continuing, then we could take that force multiplier approach. But combining technology and humans is definitely the hybrid approach to this.
Taking a hybrid security approach to critical infrastructure and securing those environments, we really need to start with the foundation of what the physical security looks like on site. And then we need to look at where there's opportunities to really, to David's point, make those individuals much more efficient, smarter, educated in their roles through technology. And so it's this idea of equipping with both that allows us to react faster, to deter and detect instances through the AI and things of that nature, quicker, but then also you still have that human tact and human element of response there as well, right? So those individuals that are providing that physical security, they can respond when there are those instances, but they're much more well educated. They know what they're responding to, where they're responding, because of the AI technology that's picking that up faster, right? But we know that you still need that human element on site. So it's really the best of both worlds with that person and technology combination.
Yeah, and I think we know two things. One, we definitely know that manpower is not your single answer. It's not going to be capable of addressing all the threats that are arrayed against critical infrastructure. It's just not. I don't care how much you pay for them, and I don't care how much manpower you put on the ground. So if you don't begin integrating technology and making that human's decision-making process faster and have greater distance and standoff, then there's no way you're going to prevent these attacks, or at least mitigate them well enough to be able to continue to function as a business and continue to produce whatever product or service you're in.
Well, I think also in critical infrastructure, we're typically talking about a landscape of a vast facility, right? Whether that's a large manufacturing style warehouse or, petrochemical locations or refineries, things of that nature. We're talking about locations that span a large geography and acreage and square footage. And so the ability to leverage that technology and camera AI systems with people allows us to have better visibility and much more of that perimeter capability of those locations than you would with just a singular individual, on a mobile patrol or something of that nature. We can have eyes in much more locations to then respond quickly.
Yeah, we could take kind of the solution aspect of it and take it further out of the rural area, miles apart. We can look at, through artificial intelligence, early detection, right? Because a lot of these bad actors can compromise the facility from far away, right? So if we could look at long-range protection and then look at a layered approach to, I call it the gates, guards, and guns, right? But, to Allie's point, David's point is you still need a human being to intervene, but you have the machine learning and the AI behind the scenes that could be early warning detection. That's, whether we have seconds or minutes for that early warning detection, that really helps.
And I think the last thing that's necessary when you talk about hybrid solutions is, as to Allie's point, how vast some of these sites are. There are probably multiple entities within that space, especially if you look at something like a port facility. And they're all individual entities functioning, all have their independent security programs. Technology allows you to integrate those and nest those much more seamlessly than you would otherwise. And it's hard otherwise to build like phone trees and emergency alarms and beeps and flags to indicate, that something's unsafe or a concern, where technology does that instantaneously and it's rarely ever wrong.
So the way we use security technology to augment, I'll call it some human behaviors, is really doing, I'll call it the mundane post-order duties, right? So allowing that security officer or professional to be alerted for high-level threats. So we look at mobile surveillance units. We look at artificial intelligence on cameras that could be thermaled out, hundreds of feet or even miles apart, right? So to Allie's point a few minutes ago, as we look at that machine learning and say, hey, if we could take away a large percentage of that threat and analyze that with a human, we now can arm that person on the boots on the ground to be able to go and inspect or expect what the issue is, and obviously be in a safe environment through what the intelligence tells us.
I think even also, taking typical security officer tasks that we can reinvigorate, right? So if we can make those individuals better armed with other information. I think of like gate access, right? And things of that nature that are in a large site in critical infrastructure spaces, and our ability to use AI technology and to augment, trucking, logistics in and out, and things of that nature where we can really take the task that was historically done by a security officer and elevate that security officer to be in real time educated about what's coming in and out through a truck gate. Maybe that officer can now man 3 gates in a row as opposed to the singular 1 gate that they were before. So not only are we finding efficiencies in, I think, the security posture that's there, we're also finding cost efficiency sometimes in that as well.
Yeah, you could obviously do more with less, we kind of say, right? So technology can be at more places at one time than a human. But again, it drives all back to the human. We'll arm that person with as much data to intervene so we can have a successful outcome.
Yeah, I mean, analyze data.
Yep.
Data that
Yeah.
you can action.
Yep.
Which is different than just watching a bunch of numbers and circumstances appear in front of your screen. If you can get a camera and AI is evaluating behavior that it sees as nefarious or like behavior that rendered some sort of a theft or what have you, the security officer will pay a lot more attention to that because the AI alerted, hey, this person is looking around furtively or whatever, and that can be picked up by the security officer.
So I think one of the things that's really unique about this leveraging of humans and technology is that oftentimes we're sort of clearing the noise, if you will, that the security officer is seeing without the technology, right? We're letting the technology and utilizing of AI to really pick up on the threat that needs to be addressed. So in a sense, we're clearing the noise of everything else that's happening in that role. And Jordan, you talked earlier about sort of the post-order, mundane tasks, if you will. Now we're really proactively making sure that the officer is responding to the most critical need in that moment, which is elevating that in the noise of everything else that's going on site for them.
As an example, we often have in a security operations center a single officer looking at 30 different cameras, and those rotate every 30 seconds for a total of 240 cameras. There's absolutely not a human, but maybe one or two on this planet that actually look at all of those cameras and figure out what's going on at some of your critical points, where machine learning, artificial intelligence can key that in immediately, especially with just some minor learning that goes on. So we're allowing the humans to continue to function like humans, get tired, we understand their limitations and their capacities. And when you aid that, it's like an exponential capacity. So now I can review 240 cameras with great accuracy and be able to pick out any type of nefarious or bad activity because the computer helped me do that.
The critical infrastructure landscape in 2024 for organizations to take a proactive step to securing their environment, I think the first thing is adaptation, right? They have to adapt to technology and embrace technology, right? We've traditionally guarded or secured environments with people, and that's great. That's never going to go away. But what we've been talking about for the last few minutes is all about proactive intelligence, right? What information are we having to be able to design a platform that's going to secure a substation or a manufacturing plant? And there's not one size fits all, right? It takes some assessment, and it takes a partnership with the client or the end user to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to implement the ideas, right? Because what we look at is solution problems, right? We want to solve problems based on solutions, not products, because some people in different vertical markets within critical infrastructure have the same problem. So let's share those best practices.